Welcome everybody to the newest episode of the Tricks of the Trade podcast. Today it'll just be Foreverguy and myself because Whisper unfortunately was unavailable today due to some real life circumstances. And yeah, so it'll just be a nice cozy duo today. I'm Sally, aka Seliathan, as always, the assassination one trick kind of guy who's writing the Icy Veins Assassination Outlaw Guides. And Guy, maybe you can introduce yourself once again for everybody who does not yet know you.
Yeah, so I'm just Forever Guy. I do a lot of the outlaw guides for Method and Wowhead, and then I play basically whatever spec is good for the tier, and then I just play Outlaw and Farm.
Which basically means you always play Outlaw because you always think that Outlaw is viable somehow.
It's true. It usually is.
Usually. Yeah, I mean, how did you feel about this tier in particular? Let's get started with that actually. Like last time we spoke and we had a podcast, we basically went into Aberrus. It was like a couple of weeks before, right? And now that everything's played out, how did you enjoy the tier? How did you kind of feel about the positioning of Rogue in general and all the three Rogue specs?
So like I guess it depends on how you look at it, right? Like if you just want to go to Warcraft logs and look at the average and just be like, yep, Rogue sucks. Then yeah, it's kind of true. Rogue does suck, but I mean, I think in terms of both, I think both in terms of like fight design and kind of overall balance, it was kind of fine. Like I like that a lot of the fights this tier didn't really rely on, you know, 18 weak auras and shit that kind of just solve it itself. Like obviously there's like the crazy Neltharion one. Have you seen that one or no?
Yeah, it's I'm not even sure if I would agree like 100% with that. I feel like it was definitely the first six bosses were pretty chill in that regard, and then the last two were kind of ramping up the value of Vicoros once again.
What weak auras did you have on Sark?
I mean, it's not necessarily Vicoros, but it's just like the overall planning that goes into that fight. Maybe, yeah,
Oh
I
well,
guess
like
it's true.
planning,
It's
like
not Vicoros in general that were like a major contributing factor on that fight. It's mostly just that fight was just incredibly scripted, and
yeah,
there were like five different things you typically had to keep track of
yeah. I'm
somehow.
fine with like assigning, movement and making like raid plans and all this, but when it's like a mechanic goes out, weak aura assigns the players to certain mechanics, and then those assigned players from the weak aura do that mechanic. It's definitely like a different vibe this tier. It was definitely like a lot of the fights were pretty simplistic in nature, but they were, pretty tough. Like Rashok was pretty tough. I feel like that was like a pretty good fight. I'm
Best
a
fight of the tier,
masochist,
I would
so
say, even, right?
yeah,
I
I
I
would
don't know
say
how
yeah,
you
it's
feel
probably the
about
best fight
that,
of the
but in
tier.
terms of like overall
That's pretty good.
ranking of the fights, I'd say that Rashok is definitely, to me personally, it's just an incredibly well designed fight, especially for the
Yeah.
placement within the raid as well. Where it ended up being, it just was like a nice patchwork like encounter that wasn't too simplistic and basically pressured everybody in the raid to just bring their A game for at least a little while. And then sadly was followed up by probably the worst boss of the raid.
Well, listen, I'm a masochist. I didn't even mind Skarn until they nerfed it. I think the fight's worse after they nerfed it. I think it was not that bad before, but I'm also insane, and I always like the fights that everybody hates. Magmarax is pretty chill. Echo is pretty chill, other than like the weak aura like kind of solving the fight. And then Sarkareth is pretty all right. I think like another thing, I've been like kind of looking at the data a little bit more because that's all I do. And I don't even think Rogue's that bad. I don't even think Rogue's that bad this tier.
It's
It's like
always
bad,
good
but
in
it's not that
progression,
bad.
right? I feel that
I
people
don't
are
even think it's that.
always looking at Warcraft logs, and then especially during the farm, Rogue never really looks that strong. And I mean, there's a certain truth to that, but I always feel that Rogue has consistently over the last couple of expansions, not just raid tiers, but actual expansions, has always been a good progression spec simply because it is just that safe to play. There's usually one cookie cutter spec or build that you can play that allows you to do really good damage while also being able to fully focus on mechanics, on weak auras, on assignments, and basically never die. Like just looking at other classes, when I look at something like Hunter, for example, they always struggle, or even mages, right? Because I mean, mages don't manage to stay alive unless they can play fire, and
No.
then it's just like, sure, they do more damage overall if the boss eventually dies, but when it comes to actual progression, Rogue is basically always alive until the very end, and that does help quite a bit in just pushing the boss a little bit further, maybe pushing into another phase, and then eventually ending up just killing the boss faster. Sure, you may not look good on the meters when the boss actually dies, but you were there and a major contributing factor to just making the boss die like 5 pulls faster, for example.
Yeah, I think Rogue does two kind of important things, right? So like the one important thing that Rogue does is it doesn't die. I genuinely I said this last tier. I'll say this every tier until I kill all Rogue defenses. If you die on a Rogue, it's because you're a noob. There's like no like basically on any fight, there's basically just like no excuse. You have the probably like akin to Ret Paladin in terms of just like immortality in raid. It is so unbelievably difficult to ever die on Rogue unless you're literally not getting healed or your entire guild is already dead, right? And then the other thing is like I don't even think Rogue's damage is that bad. So like obviously if you go to Warcraft logs and you go to statistics, rankings, blah blah blah, and you see Rogues at like the middle, but so there's like this weird there's like just like data stuff that's happening, right? So if you go to hold on, let me change my mic really quick. I keep pushing. I'm using push to talk, but push to talk sucks. Anyway, so like if you go to Rashok and you're like 95th percentile, right? And you're like, holy heck. Frosty K, Demo, and Holy Marksman Fire. These specs are so OP, right? Because like, yeah, they are, right? But the thing is, if you go to the actual like the parses, like the actual like specific like rankings, if you just exclude external buffs, there's just rogues. Like I think the bigger factor for rogue looking terrible on Warcraft logs, like this tier specifically, is that you're never getting an external on a rogue. And because you're never getting an external on a rogue, and classes like Frost, Demo, Arcane, Devo, Unholy, Fire, Shadow, like all of these specs are going to get PI, right? Which is naturally going to push their average up because they're considered like the default, receiving PI specs, right? Meanwhile, if Rogue never gets PI, it doesn't even have like those upper bounds of parses to look at, right?
Yeah, I do agree. There's some truth to it. I think it's also a little bit weird to look at farm passes in general. I think just when you look at rogue streamers, for example, or even just, I don't know how you experienced it yourself, yeah, but when a boss dies and you actually kill it for the first time, odds are that a rogue is somewhere on the details. And not just because you said always show myself, but because they typically end up performing pretty well on a first kill, because they're always going to be alive, and because like half the raid typically tends to bleed out towards the end of the fight, but the rogue will be there and he will still be alive at the end. I've seen multiple kills just this tier, and I've had plenty of experiences like that myself, where I was literally one of the last, or even the single last person to still be alive and actually kill the boss.
Yeah.
And so I think in progression, it's just a really good toolkit to have a couple of DPS that will always provide damage, that can always soak mechanics if necessary, that always have something still ready when everybody else is starting to bleed out.
Yeah, I mean, even on what's it called? Even on like Rashok. Like I'm looking at Rashok even on farm. The only class I'm losing to is a PI class. Like obviously, apparently everybody just plays in guilds where everybody ranks ones and shit. But just like other than the guy getting PI, I'm basically top damage on all the single target fights. Like obviously on
I
Equa
mean, you shouldn't
Veltharion.
be though. Let's be honest, right? Like if you're
I don't
being
think
like
so.
top
Not with
three
that.
on a fight like Rashok, you shouldn't be top three on a fight like Rashok.
I,
At
unless
least
your
okay.
entire guild is
So
getting
maybe this
PI,
is
that's like
me talking from the
pretty.
assassination POV, right? But Rashok, for
Uh-huh.
example, is probably the worst possible fight in terms of fight length for assassination cooldowns. Because
Oh
unless
yeah, it
the
just sounds
boss
like
literally
a
lives until
simulation,
the
right?
very last second of the possible enrage timer, you're losing a full set of cooldowns.
Yeah, because your cooldowns are 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
fights are
then you
usually
don't
like
use them
five and
immediately,
change.
and on Rashok it's particularly annoying because you're basically moving into this point where you want the boss, like you get one more death mark, like not the last but the second to last death mark that you're getting is going to be right around the time where the boss is hitting 35% HP. So
Yeah,
ideally you're getting that one into execute, but then you hope that people start dying towards the end of the fight so the boss lives long enough that you get another one, another
yeah,
death mark with the second potion after 5 minutes. But you typically
yeah. At
don't,
least for like
so
sub and
that makes
outlaw,
it
it
really
feels
awkward.
like pretty reasonable to be close to the top. I mean, like again, if you just like look at like if you just like exclude external buffs on the actual like rankings of Rashok, like obviously there's like a lot of other classes than just Rogue, but like there are a lot of rogues in the top 100 just in terms of like, if you play the spec well and you obviously have the gear and the kill timers aren't like super unfortunate for your specific like specs cooldown window, it's really like I don't know. I don't think Rogue is that bad. Especially because, dude, Rogue's getting insane buffs next patch. Like, how much is it? Do you know how much sub is getting buffed with the ring changes and stuff, or no? Is it like two
I
or three?
mean, I think it's quite significant on AoE actually, similar to Outlaw, because you weren't
I don't
actually
care.
playing Amulet on AoE.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and then on, I mean, we could just check the pins real quick, right? It seems like
yeah, yeah.
1k DPS buff on single target, and then yeah, like AoE, it's a massive buff actually. I really don't understand this. It's like one of those situations where the tuning, where I'm just scratching my head because I'm like, okay, so if you're not playing these items on AoE, why is the compensation buff an aura buff? Why is it not specifically buffing single target abilities that you do not use on AoE? Right? To me,
So
that's just
okay,
always, I never understand that. If something happens that makes me lose 3% uh, damage on single target and no damage on AoE, why am I getting an aura buff as a compensation instead of just buffing something like Mutilate or Shadow Strike? Right? Like
all right.
abilities that you never use outside of single target.
Uh-huh. All right, here I have a better question. Why are you complaining that the spec is getting a buff that it probably doesn't deserve?
I mean, yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, it's. I think Outlaw will actually end up being somewhat similar to Subtlety in performance, or at least like pre-patch Subtlety, I guess, since
Mhm.
Subtlety also gets buffed, but not as much, obviously.
Yeah,
Uh,
like Outlaw is getting a 6% single target buff and then like a 10% AoE
Yeah,
buff, and then
Outlaw will
it's
definitely.
a
I mean, and that's
pretty
with
large
us not
numbers.
really knowing yet whether or not there will be some reroll priority changes just on cleave with the grand melee change. Um, so maybe there's even more to be gained on AOE if you reroll more heavily for GM, for example, on AOE.
Yeah, some stuff still is getting figured out,
But
but
it's
for
not going to
the
make like a big dent. Like it's not suddenly going to be 15% all of a sudden, right?
yeah, it might be like from
Yeah,
10
I
to
do
11
think
or
that some of
something.
these changes are probably going to be like it's kind of a situation where it's like no matter what you do right now, it doesn't really matter because at this point we all know that there will be more coming down the line. So maybe we can segue this uh, a little bit. But I just wanted to talk about it real quick. I think, do you feel like the value of Rogue and like someone said in the chat, like the bringability of Rogue was kinda due to the fact that there weren't really any fights this year that required like a lot of on-demand burst or had a lot of ads that needed to be killed like ASAP, where Rogue typically struggled in previous tiers?
Can you reword the question? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Like if you're like this tier was like a heavily single target centric tier, right? Like there weren't
Yep.
really encounters. Even Sakharov and Echo, while they did have fights, these ads didn't need to die like
Yep.
due to people spending massive amounts of cooldowns on it. Sure, you had an arcane mage basically soloing one of the ads or your unholy DK or whatever on Sakharov, but it wasn't like Vault where you had constant ad spawns where you really needed to actually use cooldowns from the entire raid on those ads, because that was something that Rogue always struggled with, right? Because our cooldowns just aren't that strong. And so whenever there was an encounter where you really needed a lot of on-demand burst, that's where Rogue was usually getting benched, right?
Yeah.
Do
Yeah,
you
I think like
feel that the fact that Rogue was pretty solid this tier was because we didn't have any encounters like this?
I just think like Rogue is generally tuned like pretty decently. Like realistically speaking, the only like terrible Rogue fight is Sark, right? Like pretty much everything else is like good for Rogue or just like like Kazara first boss, Rogue's fine. Amalgamation,
I
like
mean, I don't even talk.
okay, it
I don't even
sucks because
consider the first like 3 4 bosses, right? Maybe that's
yeah,
elitist.
well that's what I mean, right?
Um, but yeah,
It's
the
like
tier kind of
Rashok Rogue
started
is
at Rashok.
good. Yeah. Rashok Rogue is like good on. It's like I would just say it's straight up good. I wouldn't even say it's okay. It's like it's a very tanky melee that does top tier single target and doesn't need externals or gear. So it's like extra OP on Prog. Fine on Skarn, same reason on Magmarax. Having Shadow Step is ridiculous on that fight compared to what Red has to deal with or something. Echo Rogue is good on. It just doesn't AoE build in P3, excuse me. And then Sarkareth is just like every rogue weakness is a feature of that fight. Just, by happenstance.
I would agree,
Uh
except for phase one. I feel like Rogue is actually fucking awful in phase one
Ow.
because you basically have one defensive, and it's
Well, that
just
yeah, that's what I mean. Sark is the only bad rogue
oh,
fighter.
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I misunderstood then. Yeah, it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I honestly think that it's just partially because we don't really benefit at all from symbol. So any
It's
fight
like
where defensively, like you're actually playing around a double Holy Priest comp, which has been the last 2 tiers, because Symbol of Hope, or 3 tiers even if we consider Sepulchre as well, right? And Sepulchre was also just like Symbol of Hope is just kind of broken.
dude,
Um,
it's turbo broken.
and
it's
and
it's
then
beyond
we are like
OP.
one of those classes where Symbol is like, okay, cool, I can Crimson Vial again, and it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, the
I mean,
thing
I'll
the
take it,
thing
right?
about
Like, I'm not gonna complain about a second Crimson
yeah.
Vial, if there's a lot of raid damage going on, but it's just, yeah, not that
Yeah,
great.
Sark as a fight is literally every single rogue weakness like wrapped into one. So a lot of the damage doesn't work on feint. All right, there's like weakness number one. All right, so there's lots of downtime. All of the rogue specs, other than assassination, require mega uptime for cycling cooldowns and just doing damage. Right, so there's another weakness. All right, the ad phases are like useless AoE damage and then like kind of useful to target, but none of the specs really do good at either. Like it's not good at blowing up the useless ads, and then it's also not good at killing the second target. Like and also doing good damage to Sark. So there's another weakness. Um and then it doesn't abuse the haste buff. So like literally like like all of the features of the fight are just like yeah, Rogue just kind of sucks. But like I
Yeah.
mean that just kind of happens
But I
sometimes,
mean, you
right?
still do well on the fight, right? Like, just in terms of raw boss damage, I think Rogue is still probably one of the top 5 classes on that fight.
Yeah, I mean, you go there and you do your job, but you're not happy to clock in.
Yeah, it always feels like when you have like these kiss curse mechanics, it always feels bad, right? And I think Mythic Plus is in a similar situation right now where we have like 3 new affixes, and they all require some level of like group coordination to deal with them, and then Rogue just can't really do anything with any of them. I mean, sure, you
Yeah,
can throw the blind, right? Like once every 2 minutes on something, but I mean, you can't really compare to like Fear Poly or Scare Beast or like any of the recastable CCs, for example. And then, I mean, yeah, Afflicted. I mean, yeah, sure, cool. You just exist,
yeah,
and that's pretty much it. It's just overall, I feel Rogue doesn't really get to do much anymore in terms of like outside of damage, and to me, that's a little bit disappointing. Um, I know that people are afraid of having another Tomb of Soak Garrus, where Rogue is basically the single-handedly responsible for soaking half the mechanics in the raid. But it there's always this problem of, okay, like we basically only bring that one thing, which is damage, and then we're not that good at it. It just makes you feel less valued, compared to many other classes that can always do something. Uh, I don't want the raid to turn into a target dummy where I'm literally just hitting the boss, and then I mean, cool, and I survive, right? That's the strength of the rogue. I hit the target dummy and I survive. And to me, that's just not very dynamic or exciting gameplay, sadly enough.
yeah. So one thing is like, I remember one good thing of Rogue on Sark, okay, is you can bait the third black hole on yourself and not lose that much because you're not doing damage anyway. So you could just get the black hole and
Yeah,
soak
but
it yourself,
that's depending on the
and then you can
strategy,
use
right? That
cloak
doesn't
on it.
matter anyway because you want to soak that one. Like us, for example, we soloed the
The
first
third
one,
one?
so we couldn't actually bait that in any meaningful way. So we went into the phase with like 0 stacks until you did the gateway, and then you get 2. And at that point, you can't afford to not take stacks or bait it anymore, because everybody wants to soak the next one to have a clean transition. Um, so in order to actually utilize the rogue in that way, you'd actually need to play, what I would argue is an inferior strategy. Uh, but yeah, there's certainly ways
Or
to
I didn't
leverage
even know there was other ways
the
to do it.
toolkit from
All I
the
know
rogue.
is
It's just no one really does it because I mean, why would you?
I mean, I just do it because it makes the fight easy. So I don't really care, dog. I have stopped caring about fucking parses and all this garbage because
Yeah, I'm
literally
just saying, like for
only
us,
noobs care
it's
about
really
Warcraft
not an
logs.
option, right? Because you want to group soak the third and fourth. So it's
Now
only if you're
we
group soaking
suicide
the
fourth.
first one that you can actually do that. What you're talking about?
We soak first, soak second, then I cloak third, and then
Yeah,
we suicide fourth, and the boss dies.
yeah, that makes sense. And we basically throw all externals on the first, and then just solo that one, no matter who gets it. Obviously, it's nice if it's a rogue, then you could
Oh,
just cloak it, right?
yeah.
But beyond that, then you have like 20-ish more seconds of healers not having to heal anything because no one has stacks it, and that was a little bit better for boss DPS for us.
True.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a decent tier, I would say. We benefited quite a bit, I think, from trinkets being really good for us this time around, which
Yeah,
has
and
been
not
a little bit
needing
of an
gear.
issue in previous tiers, maybe. At least that's how I feel about it. Like previous tiers, when there were raid trinkets, there was always someone better to get them.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
this
we
time
wanted
around,
the poop
actually,
trinket.
like bomb dispenser, if one dropped, you gave it to the rogue, right?
Oh hell yeah, dude. Oh, give me more
Or the
trinkets like
survival hunter, I
bomb
guess. But
fire.
yeah,
Yeah, dude, that shit's so OP. No other class wants it, dude.
yeah. But it's also, I think, somewhat related to the dungeon trinkets all being kind of garbage for us. So
Yeah. Also, the dungeon trinkets
we
are.
actually wanted the raid trinkets this time around.
I mean, we wanted the trinkets last year too. What are you talking about?
I mean, everybody wanted Grief Torch because Grief Torch was just a broken base design of a trinket.
Yeah, and
But
then we went Spectral
beyond
Storm or
that,
CT.
Spiteful Storm. I mean, like you're right in the sense that all the trinkets last year were kind of stupidly broken in some way, shape, or form. I forgot the name of the Diona trinket for M plus. Obviously, everybody wanted that, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah,
Let's talk a little bit about what's coming up ahead, right? We know that Rogue is going to get a bunch of changes.
let's
Blizzard
go.
actually, like Eon actually addressed it as well. That there were some personal issues that basically kept the planned Rogue changes that were supposed to be coming this patch with 10.1.5, and are now being pushed back to. I mean, we don't know yet if they're being pushed back to 10.17 or 10.2, but it's definitely going to happen. So it's no longer a matter of when. It's no longer a matter of if. It's just a matter of when, right?
Yeah,
So I think some of the changes and buffs and even the aura buffs for sub and outlaw right now are probably being done with that in mind. Where it's like, okay, sure, there will be changes anyway, so it doesn't really matter if sub and outlaw get like an AOE buff that they probably didn't need, because it will be addressed once again when things are being looked at in more depth and detail.
yeah. I don't think any of the buffs have anything to do with the future patch, right? Because
Yeah, they'll
like
just like the moment, like having that new baseline exist for a couple of like weeks until or until like 10.17, for example, doesn't really matter, right? Like it doesn't affect progression for a lot of people, and Mythic Plus is kind of a wild west anyway when it comes to class viability. And so I think it's just not really a big deal to buff subtlety even more. Um, so yeah, it is what it is.
straight up nerf subtlety, bro. I'm over that spec, bro. It's been too long. Been too good at AOE
Yeah,
builds
I
for too
think if
long.
we're looking
Okay,
at changes that are
time.
coming for Rogue, right,
It's time.
we're looking at both just like numerical changes, I think, and tuning to just make like balance things a little bit better. But we're obviously also looking at like actual reworks. At least as an assassination main, that's what I'm hoping for, right? It's just assassination. Just please
I mean,
do something with this
assassination.
spec.
Yeah, assassination needs something that isn't
It needs a lot
Crimson
of things.
Tempest, right? Like I feel like it just needs its own version of like Psychic Link or whatever the this what is the doesn't Feral have something like Psychic Link now too?
I mean, both specs do, right? Like both Shadow Priest
Yeah,
and
like
Feral have like this every target afflicted by your dots also takes your single target damage. I actually
yeah.
don't even like that concept. I think just leaning into the dots themselves more would be more interesting, because what I worry about is just the death of damage over time specs in general, where it's like even looking at Shadow Priest, looking at Feral Druid, Boomy, Affliction Warlock is kind of like the only spec that still has dots, and even then it's mostly Malefic Grasp at this point. And then you're like, okay, multi-dotting as a damage profile basically doesn't exist anymore. That's how I look at it, right? Like there's no class anymore where you have like a 2 or 3 target situation. You just throw your dots on all these 3 targets and they're doing a shitload of damage. What you have instead is
Yeah.
like this you spread your single target damage and it does AoE on everything that has your dots, but then you end up most of your damage being no longer your damage over time. It's just it's your direct damage that is now being spread on all targets. Okay, that's not really a DOT spec anymore.
Yeah, I think it's just like I think it's just like a design philosophy thing that they've kind of wanted to just drop because like you like obviously like you may like it, but I don't think most people enjoy the whole like tab target, load this creature up with 13 different diseases, dots, poisons, bleeds, all this garbage. They kind of just want to, it's just like you're asking a lot of like mental brain power for like a lot of people when like the damage is just going to be like it can't be just straight up always
I
better
mean
than
that's fine though, right? Because if you don't like that kind of gameplay, you can always spec into the fourth warrior outlaw, and just
uh-huh.
brainlessly mash your buttons and not really have to worry about it, right?
Yeah,
So
but
I,
like
I
the
think that kind of variety is nice. I think it's I agree with you that after Legion, because I mean, and plus and cleave situations in general were kind of dominated by damage over time in Legion, and then they kind of nerfed all of that, right? Affliction Lock,
yeah.
Boomkin, even Assassination was definitely one of the strongest single target specs at that point. And then they kind of got rid of all of that, and they reworked some of that. Shadow Priest got reworked like 17 times. Um, Boomy has definitely moved away from the damage over time builds as well. And yeah, Assassination kind of didn't, and because it didn't receive proper tuning, it just doesn't do AoE anymore or cleave or anything really. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
it would be nice to still have a couple of specs that work in this way and have it be strong for sustained situations. The problem is if you have a damage over time based class and you're not doing good sustained AoE like damage, then what the hell are you doing? What the hell is that spec? It just needs something.
what's the cooldown of psychic?
What do you mean? I mean,
Is it just a passive?
nah. You just have to like you automatically cleave all your damage onto targets afflicted with VT, and then you
Okay, well
have
maybe
another
it doesn't
talent that
need.
automatically applies VT to X targets. Like you just go Shadow Crash, and then you basically apply everything at once with one ability, right?
Yeah, okay, maybe it doesn't need Blade Flurry but permanently Assassination Row, but maybe like I don't know, I feel like making it so like Death Mark, like whenever you apply Death Mark to a target, it applies all the garbage you put on a monster. Just like I feel like it should have like some way to make AoE not just like a permanent headache. I'm fine with it being like a multi-dot headache sometimes, but I feel like at least sometimes it should just be easy,
Yeah,
right?
the problem that I have with something like Psychic Link is that it's basically just Blade Flurry, right?
Yeah, I
It's
mean
Blade
that's
Flurry
yeah.
with an extra step that you don't have to press every 15 seconds. But at its core, it's just the same kind of design where you just do your stuff on one target and then everything just automatically spreads to everything else. And to me, that's just not engaging gameplay. Uh, so yeah, it's awkward. Personally, I mean, this may be a hot take, right? I don't like indiscriminate carnage either. I think it actually takes away a lot of what the spec used to be about, where you just kind of like applying all your dots with a single ability is really really lazy to me, and it actually contributes to this issue of not being able to tune the dots to deal a lot of damage individually because you can apply them so easily, and in order for that to not be broken, the dots can't do a lot of damage. But yeah, it is what it is. I think Outlaw obviously is where it is, and has always been in a solid spot. I think overall, the subtlety AoE has improved a lot with the introduction of Sectec. What I would personally like to see for sub is just that Rapture would play a more meaningful role on AoE again. I always liked I always liked the way that it played in early BFA, where you basically like during dance you use direct damage finishers. Outside of dance, you were kind of dotting up everything, and then you had like this nice flow of reducing your cooldown on the shadow dance while you were actively applying the dots, and then you used the shadow dance, and then you were actually using the direct damage finishers. So
Okay,
hopefully,
subtlety.
yeah.
Okay, straight up subtlety. Rupture needs to not be usable in AOE. Like that is the most. I think that's the straight up most dog shit part about subtlety rogue. There is no way I am ever in my life playing subtlety and I'm multi-dotting. That is just absolute garbaggio. That is nonsense. Like what? Like that
Why
should
not
not be
though?
a
It
thing.
would add a level of prio damage where you
I don't
like
care. I
smart
don't
target
anything
selection. I mean, I know that this
anything
seems
you're
alien to
saying.
you as an outlaw rogue, right? But like having smart target selection and being able to do a little bit more damage at the cost
Mhm,
of overall AOE, that always
mhm.
to me seemed like a good thing, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, I don't care. I'm not playing. Like, if I want, here's the thing. Okay,
Okay,
all of the
I get it.
specs are designed to do something, right? I don't play subtlety to play assassination. I don't want to like when I play subtlety. I want to press shadow dance. I want to press symbols of death. I want to blow things up with a big finisher. Okay, I don't want to be shuriken storm, rupture, tab, shuriken like that is like ass crack to me. Like that is beyond terrible.
How
You
do
know,
you feel
like
about the old Salty then, where it was still Nightblade? It had a lower duration, and it actually improved the damage of all your other skills that you used on
yeah,
that target.
I have always thought it's straight up dog shit that subtlety ever multi dots. It is so terrible to me. It's like the biggest reason that I hate playing subtlety and keys is because I don't want to play assassination. Like if I wanted to play assassination, I would go N, I would go subtlety, and I would go activate, right? Or I would go assassination and then activate, right? Like like the spec should be doing different things, right? Like I shouldn't be playing subtlety and then multi-dotting, and I shouldn't be playing assassination and only spamming like eviscerate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do get it. Like, I think that's ultimately coming down to just yeah preference. I don't know how people listening in are feeling about the current state of Salty. To me, it's definitely an improvement over what it was prior to Sectec being part of the rotation and building to big Sectecs. I think it's definitely gotten a lot better now that that is part of the gameplay loop. Um, but yeah, it's I think it's weird because I do agree with what you said, where subtlety and assassination are a little bit too samey. It's just that subtlety is more engaging to play in single target and less engaging to play on AoE, and then for assassination it's the other way around, where uh, assassination is basically resident sleeper on single target, and then it's quite fun to play, to at least for me personally, with the multi-dotting concept from a melee perspective on AoE. But
Yeah,
then
it's the
weirdly enough, Asa kind of does more damage on single target, where it's like less difficult to play, and then Salty
yeah.
does more damage on AOE, even though it's definitely quite a bit easier to play than Assassination. Skill expression kind of doesn't really exist in this regard.
I think like the it's like when originally we were thinking it was going to be a DPS gain to tab target spread find weakness in AoE on outlaw because um it like double dips on blade flurry. It's like sure that like adds depth where now when I'm going into a pax with shadow dance with audacity I'm tab targeting around spreading find weakness, but it's just like dude, if I wanted to play assassination and multi-dot I would play assassination. I'm playing outlaw to play outlaw, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Which
I
is I'm
do.
gonna one target, I'm gonna go gorilla. That's like
I
the
think
point of the spec,
there's
right?
different degrees to this, right? Where just having a little bit of skill expression that allows you to get a few extra percentage out of your class is kind of nice. The problem is always if the difference between playing it this optimally and not doing so is quickly reaching levels where everybody feels compelled to play that way. And
Yeah.
then suddenly you're introducing this additional level of complexity that a lot of people just don't want to have or don't enjoy engaging with, especially if it's very similar to what the core feature of another class is, right? or another spec
Yeah.
in this case.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's just like I it's like I think Reels was talking about it and then some other people were talking about it. It's like oh, Outlaw maybe should get a cooldown. But I'm like, why? Like Outlaw for years has been like the spec without a cooldown. Like you have the micro cooldown spec and then you have like the major cooldown spec, right? Like why even give Outlaw the option to have a cooldown, right? Because cooldowns are inherently strong, so even if they're worse, they're sometimes better. And I don't know. I like when specs have like identity and you know like a role that they play, right? Like Outlaw being like the no cooldown, low target cleave, monkey spec. Meanwhile, like assassination is like this like single target execute. Meanwhile, like subtleties, these like micro C's, like I just like when the specs have like a theme to them and like a niche.
Yeah, it's I've always compared it to Warlock, where the differences between the three rogue specs in how well they do in specific niche scenarios is always very minor, which is definitely
Yeah.
kind of nice because it basically means that you can play whichever spec you want and still do well. Um, but it also leads to this issue of the differences being so small that all the specs just feel a little bit too samey, and you can't really just whip out another spec and suddenly change the way that your raid or your M plus group can deal with certain tasks, right? Whereas as a warlock, if you realize, hey, we just don't have enough cleave damage on this one big ad, then you just switch to Destro and then you just fucking obliterate uh that ad that is spawning there, right? Um, or if you need like a shit ton of single target burst on like a 2-ish minute cooldown, then demo is definitely going to kill whatever target you cast your tyrant on. I feel that Rogue just doesn't have this kind of distinction between specs. We all kind of like all three specs kind of excel at the same thing. With the exception of Assassination just being really far behind on AoE right now, but that wasn't always the case either.
Yeah, I remember
And
back in
yeah,
the
you
Legion.
don't really pick a niche based on the spec you choose. You pick a gameplay style, and even that
Yeah.
has been not as unique to each individual spec like it used to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what are you hoping for when it comes to potential changes? Specifically, I think outside, like I don't know how you feel about it, but I think that Outlaw as a spec right now is actually in a pretty good spot. It's the
Yeah.
class tree first and foremost that is probably lacking in choice and direction a little bit compared to other classes, and I
Yeah,
think
so
that
like
kind of affects
basically
all
like
three specs the same, right?
yeah, I think like the realistically like the so there's like so obviously there's like the grand melee change, which I think I don't mind the grand melee change. I think it should like the grand melee should have been added to old grand melee, not just completely replaced. That could be something they look at when they ever do like the larger sweeping kind of changes. And then also it should probably just be like a little bit stronger. Like it should probably be a little bit more than 10%. Um but this is all like numerics, right?
Yep.
I think like the outlaw tree is like mostly pretty good. I think like grappling hook should probably just be a baseline ability. Um, because like the whole thing with the keep it rolling builds, you don't even go grappling hook because it's like a 1.5% DPS gain to not go grapple. Like that's just lame. Like there's other ways to fix it. Is like do you know the outlaw tree at all or like in any capacity?
I mean, yeah, obviously, I do have a suggestion for that, and that is that you could theoretically just consider that losing 1% DPS for mobility might be a situational choice instead of always expecting to get everything
Yeah, that's also
that
fair. But I
like
think
always
like
wanting everything you want, always getting everything you want is probably not the idea behind the talent tree rework.
yeah.
Where it's like, yeah, you kind of want to have these choices of, okay, is this an encounter where you need high mobility, or you can cheese a certain mechanic with something like grapple? Then yeah, absolutely, you pick it up because it will make up for the 1% DPS loss you get from not picking that worst of the alternative DPS talents. Um, I'd actually be happy about having some of that choice in assassination. Sadly, we really kind of don't.
Yeah, I think it just kind of depends on who you ask, right? Like I in general don't really care. Like I think it's like actually is an interesting choice in regards to like do I want damage or mobility? Usually people just look at, Simcraft DPS and that's all they care about because
Yeah.
they blue parse and they need every little, fraction of a percent they need, but like I don't know. I think some spells like a grappling hook are a little bit too iconic.
Yeah, I do agree in
Um
that regard. Where it's like if an ability is so core and also just straight up fun to use that you want to have it, and then it comes at a cost that's kind of not great.
yeah. Another fix is just removing weapon master and ambidexterity from the tree. It would just make it so you always get grappling hook because like rather than going for these like micro damage talents, you can just like always go into like grapple or reduce cooldown on grapple or the it's just more interesting when the top of the tree just doesn't have like dumb damage talents like weapon master because it's not like weapon master is the
Don't you think that it
compelling
would
talent.
already be fixed by just moving grapple to a more central location instead of having it to the far left where it is right now?
I mean, yeah, you can make it so it paths into improve. Like you can move it with riposte, and then you just path through it. But
Yeah.
that doesn't fix the underlying issue of like weapon master and ambidexterity are just kind of like dumb talents that exist to just siphon talent points away from interesting utility choices that you can make. Because like you're never gonna make the choice to go the increased blade flurry range while your melee attacks are active because you just can't. Like it's too prohibitive to go this talent, but because there's these dumb talents like Weapon Master, right? Like either like bake it in, remove it, balance the spec around not having this talent because it's not like it's a defining talent. It's just like it's just free damage, right? Um, yeah, but that's like mostly my issue with like a lot of the tree. I
Yeah,
also
I think the general design of the trees was with that idea that you have like a somewhat central path where you put most of the important and iconic abilities like Adrenaline Rush, right? Like obviously
yeah
you would never consider playing Outlaw without AR as a cooldown because it's just been the
yeah
cooldown for the spec for such a long time. But it's
yeah and
also something
blades
that you
and roll
never have to
downs.
worry about picking up because of its placement within the
Yeah
talent tree. Um, but then when it comes to the talents that are placed on the edge, like I mean, in the class tree, you mostly have the PvP talents on the side, which is kind of fine because then you don't really want to pick them up for raiding on plus anyway.
yeah
Uh, but I do feel that something like grappling hook is just a little bit too far on the side, so you can't just naturally path through it to pick it up as you start going for the higher DPS talents that are coming a little bit after.
yeah. I think the outlaw tree is like pretty good overall. Like obviously some people take issue with Fan the Hammer both existing and being so deep in the tree. You can make an argument for putting it higher in the tree because it's like it's so central to how the spec plays. It's similar to like Fatal Flourish in terms of importance because just like Fatal Flourish is like this crazy energy talent that like if you
Yep.
don't go you just like lose, and in the same way like if you just don't go Fan the Hammer you're just gonna lose. So like you could move it up in the tree more. Like you could put it where float like a butterfly is, and then move float somewhere, and then like basically every single build can get fan the hammer. But then the problem is just like you're not fixing the tree. You're just making outlaw stronger because now rather than pathing through kind of two crummy talents, you now just always get fan the hammer, and then like you're just stronger. And like I don't really care about being stronger. I care about like vibes, right?
Yeah, especially
And
when
like for
you're
the
when you're
most,
talking about it from a design perspective, right? Where if,
yeah,
if you have a problem and you're finding a solution, okay, what's the problem? The problem is that the talent is so strong that everybody wants to play it, but the problem then becomes that it's so deep in the tree that it basically limits choices elsewhere because of how many points it costs to get it in the first place. Um,
yeah. I guess the
Moving
thing
it up
is
doesn't really
like.
solve the problem of it just being so good and there not being any alternative talents that could offer a similarly powerful playstyle that basically doesn't pick it, right? It doesn't have an equal on the other side of the tree, if you get what I mean.
Uh, no, I don't really. So like the thing. So like it's like gonna be like a larger thing, I guess. Is like so like I don't have a problem with Fan the Hammer being so over centralizing to how the spec plays, right? Like I think it's like a fun talent that people enjoy. Obviously, like whenever they nerfed Fan the Hammer originally, people went fucking ape shit. Like it's a fun, strong talent that people like to play. So I don't really see an issue with it being like super centralizing to how the spec plays. And then in addition, like let's say hypothetically, you put Fan the Hammer like near the top of the tree, like instead of Swift Slasher, right? the shitty buff. Like you put it opposite of Fatal Flourish or whatever, right? It's like that doesn't really like make new builds exist, right? It's like Outlaw has like two like gameplay altering like talent choices that you can really take. It's the hidden opportunity and then to keep it rolling, right? Like these are the only really pillars of play that the spec can engage with. Like, cause like Greenskin Wicker isn't like a
Yeah.
rotation altering build defining talent. It's just like a damage talent, right? Meanwhile, like keep it rolling and hidden opportunity are very like they tend to take over the playstyle, right? So I don't really think it affects build diversity because just like the way the tree works is you have like basically like two important things. Um and then like oh, it's gonna be so hard to design the rogue tree because like the rogue tree, like the actual like the class tree, I don't like it because there's like all the utility I want to grab. But the thing that I like about the rogue tree is I like all of like the damage nodes. I like the Shadow Dance stuff. I like T and I like ER. Do you know what I mean? But I don't want all of them.
Yeah, it's I like just comparing to the other spec trees. I feel that Outlaw definitely has the most well designed tree. That doesn't mean that it is without flaws, right?
Obviously, yeah.
Uh, I it's
Yeah.
definitely nice. The Keep It Rolling came back up as a viable playstyle that actually theoretically is even better than HO, but no one's playing it anyway, even though it's technically better, right? At
It's
least
gonna
in
be like
terms
six
of
percent better post patch, so they're all gonna be playing it, hopefully.
yeah. I don't know. Outlaw players are a special breed of player though, so you
But you
never
also have to
know.
remember like a lot of a lot of what pushes the meta is perception, right? Like the perception is still that HO is the best, right? Because whether it's, you can call me being lazy or whatever, but it's like I haven't updated the Wowhead guides uh because like the build is just like it's like half a percent better and it's less mobile. So like do people even know this build exists because it's not in Warcraft logs? It's not really like super prominent in the Discord. It's not super prominent in any of the guides. Like a lot of it is going to be like perception and visibility, right? Like obviously over this weekend, I'm going to be putting all the keep it rolling builds into all the guides, but like how much of it is just like people go to Warcraft logs, they see the best build, oh, the best build's HO, and then that's it, right? They don't really like look anything past that, or they just look at the Wowhead guide and they just copy the talents and go from there, right?
Yeah, it's. I think it's the problem of community perception when it comes to these things is always that if something is equally as good as the previously best build, then no one's going to change and play the new one,
Yeah,
right? It needs to be better, and
yeah,
typically it needs to be quite a bit better for people to actually take note and change. And that's something that we see even with like raid meta or on plus meta, where a new
yeah,
class can be competitive now, but no one is going to level an alt to play a class that is as good as what they already have. The
yeah,
only reason for them to actually switch is if they act like if it's actually doing something better.
yeah,
And I think that's definitely, especially when it comes to like a pure DPS class like a rogue, is difficult to really make happen. Something that I'm very sad about with Assassination, and I think most people would agree with that, is just the fact that we had like this dual build choice between Kingsbane and DTB that had like very distinct playstyles. And then
yeah.
obviously we lost that when we made those two a choice node instead, and introduced AP instead, which didn't really add anything. At least at the moment, it doesn't to the toolkit, or allowed us to open up a new niche where we would be able to excel. And that actually made the spec a lot less interesting, simply because it doesn't have this dual nature of you have at least two different builds that you can play, whether that is because of preference or whether that is because one is better in a certain environment and the other one is better in another environment. I think for Outlaw, I don't know if you would agree, it really is just preference at this point. Like it's not like any one of the
Between
two
the
possible
builds.
builds is something that you play because of it being better in a certain scenario. It's just if you like one build more than the other, then you just play it.
Yeah, that's what it is right now. But post patch, it goes like the keep it rolling
I,
build
I
is like
guess
6%
numerically,
better.
one build just kind of takes over too much for you to be able to ignore the fact that it was already better, but it's going to be even better post patch, and at some point
Yeah,
you're kind of trolling if you're not switching, right?
yeah. The HO build is still good in AOE, and you still get grapple. Well, okay. The whole like HO gets grapple thing is actually wrong because you can get grapple with keep it rolling. You just lose 1% DPS, but
Yeah,
losing 1% DPS from a 6% DPS gain, you're still 4.5 ahead. So it's like
yeah. That's the thing, right?
yeah,
Is if you have like these choice not even choice nodes, but if you have these choices of like utility versus DPS, I think if it's within the realm of like 1-ish%, then I think that that's a fair choice. Even like,
Yep.
obviously it is kind of sad that Outlaw lost two of the most iconic talents. If you're playing certain builds with both losing aggro
Mhm.
and grapple, and then all the other specs actually don't or want to pick up acrobatic instead. So it takes away from from what made Outlaw unique in the past. So that's obviously
Yep.
a bit of a sad environment. But yeah,
Yeah, I think
enough
like
about
the
Outlaw. Maybe, or do you have like one more point
oh
to
yeah, I
add to
guess
the
like
Outlaw
the
discussion?
not really like the outlaws but like the one thing I want from the class tree, like specifically, is like the main things is like the junk talents gotta go. Like tight spender, garbage. Thief's versatility, garbage. Night
Yeah.
Stalker, deadly precision, all these gotta go. But what I like a pillar of the class tree that I want to stay is I want there to be choice within the bottom of the talent tree. Um but I don't want everything. Do you know what I mean? Like, do you know how Red Paladin gets everything?
Yeah, there's a few classes that basically have the pathing
Yeah, like Red
allows you
Paladin.
to basically pick up some central talents, and then you can kind of branch out into all the bottom talents, like the tier 10 talents, simply because everything is one pointers, and you kind of get to
Yeah, you just get everything.
yeah.
Like I don't oh sorry, I'm tired. Um I don't like that Ret Paladin just gets I get Hammer of Wrath, always critically strikes. I always get Divine Toll plus the Divine Toll Juicer talent. I always get Dusk and Dawn and I want it to still be that I don't get everything on my class tree as rogue, because I really do like the Shadow Dance, the Deeper Stratagem, the Echoing Reprimand, and the Thistle Tea stuff. Um, but like I feel like I would enjoy rogue less if I always had Thistle Tea, I always had Shadow Dance, and I always had Echoing Reprimand. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a bit of an issue for me personally because I think that there's also this issue of button bloat at some point.
Yeah, that's
I'm not a
exactly why,
fan
right?
of Thistle Tea in general. I think
I love Thistle Tea.
it's
I think it's my favorite talent in years, straight up.
I would like it way more if it was if it would lean more into the amp instead of the energy. But as far as I'm aware, the only reason it's actually good is because of the energy and not because of the mastery that you get from it. Because mastery just isn't as like it doesn't provide enough mastery to actually be used for the amp itself.
I like that Thistle Tea is this ability that it's a multi-purpose, low impact skill testing button. It's like everything I want, right? Where it's like in subtlety, you use it for AoE damage. And then for other situations, you just use it for energy. But pre-planning and like thinking about its use is like it's not super obvious, right? Where it's like there's a lot of times where like you could be out of energy with Thistle Tea. You could like obviously just like drink the tea, but if you're about to go into a shadow dance with sub and you have infinite energy, like you're not like there's no reason, right? Or it's the same with outlaw. It's like if you know you have like a blade rush or an adrenaline rush going, you just don't need to use the thistle tea. You can like sit on the charges for a little bit longer, right?
But is that appropriate for talent that is at the very bottom and is
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
the
Yep.
ultimate talent?
Yes.
I heavily disagree
Yep.
with that. I think
I
it's a
strongly,
decent
I
enough
strongly
ability.
agree.
The one thing that I would see with Thistle Tea, or would like to see with Thistle Tea, is that it shouldn't provide the energy all at once. I think if it provides mastery over 6 seconds, it should just provide the energy over 6 seconds as well. Um, but
Yeah, you can make it like 80 and then 20 over two, or like you could just what's it
yeah,
called?
something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do agree that the biggest issue I think for all three specs is in the class tree and not in the individual spec trees. While all of the spec trees have some issues, the assassination tree has some major problems. I think it already starts with the fact that we have to spend 8 points in the first 3 lines instead of the first four, which
Yeah.
basically heavily limits our choices in the middle part of the tree, right? Where you have to spend 12 points in 4 lines of talents, whereas every other class has to do it in 3. And so that means that they usually get to pick more talents, or get more choice in that part where most of the more interesting talents are sitting. And for us, it's kind of just, yeah, we don't have any interesting talents in the middle section of the tree at all. Like there's nothing there. There's no utility there. unless you want to count Shadow Step. It's basically just passive improvements. Uh, we have stuff like Unbreakable Stride, which is just like, what is that talent even? Um, and then it's just a little bit boring. Like here, take 2% damage here, take 3% damage there. It's I don't get excited looking at either the left, the middle, or the right side of the tree when I select all these talents. None of those feel like, oh, cool, I'm really happy. I finally have this. I
Yeah,
think
I
the
like.
biggest game changer talent in that middle section of the class tree is Vigor, and that's because of the max energy, because having 100 max energy just feels fucking awful when all the specs nowadays generate way more energy than they used to.
Yeah, it's really just like they just gotta like trim some of these like junk like pointless damage talents because like if you just junk shit like tight spender and like a lot of this junk like the talent tree opens up a lot more, right? Because rather than being like, oh, I have to get 2 points into thief's versatility for 4% verse, right? Like even something as simple as that I can now just go like, oh wow, instead of going this like pointless garbaggio talent I can now grab improve sprint. I can grab, master poisoner. I can grab tricks. I can grab like it's
Yeah.
really just like a lot of these like garbaggio talents that don't do anything, right?
Yeah, especially like the lack of tricks, for example, is something that I really noticed myself. I mean, Assassination never had like good tricks value anyway, but it just feels bad to know that tricks is basically a talent you really kind of don't want to pick up unless you want to path down the right side, and then you the reason you pick it up when you go towards Shadow Dance is because the other talents like Shadowrunner and Blackjack are just, you know,
Yeah,
they basically they might as well not exist.
yeah.
Um, Yeah, it's a bit weird, the way that the pathing works, where we basically like I don't understand why you can't go from tricks to prey on the weak, for example. Like why does that kind of pathing not exist? We
Uh, because they I'm pretty sure they don't have anywhere on the tree where you can go like an X, right? Because like the arrow goes from
Sure, but then
blackjack to shadow step, so
then
they
just
can't do a
remove
tricks to a
blackjack.
prey.
Like move more to the right side where the PvP, or to the left side where the PvP talents are, and just the problem that I have is that most of the talents that allow us to branch from one side to another are really really bad, and they're usually no like zero DPS talents. Right, you have
It just
blackjack
needs
and
a
nimble fingers that allow you to go from left to middle, or right to middle, and then you have another set with rush setup and dead nerfs, which are both like all of these talents are just so low impact, and
yeah.
just yeah, I don't want to spend
Oh
a
yeah, I
talent
definitely
point into
agree.
that just to allow me to go from left side to right side.
I think the tree just needs a reshaping, like in
Yeah,
terms of like not even like fully redesign it. Like obviously you could just like fully redesign the tree if you want to go crazy extracurricular, but like even if you just look at like the shape of the paladin tree, right? Like when I'm playing my paladin, I can just get anywhere from anywhere, and it's not even because like there's not damage in the tree, because there's hella random damage in this in the class tree, right? Like
yeah,
vengeful wrath is like divine toll and resonance or damage. There's like random like crit chance in the tree. Like there's haste. There's so much random damage stats, but the thing is like you can get anywhere from anywhere just because of like the layout of the actual
yeah.
tree itself, right?
It's like when I wrote the guide as well, I basically said that the problem with the rogue trees is that while initially it looks like you have a lot of choice, you obviously have a couple of talents that you want to get, and once you actually like know that you want to pick up, say for example, you want to get deeper stratagem because having 6 CP is just better for every spec at the moment,
Yeah.
and you typically want Seal Fate, and once you have chosen those two talents as the talents that you want, you're suddenly left with maybe one or two optional talents that you can assign to unlock the next level, right? And I think the this is one of those issues that we have specifically that other classes don't really run into, is that when we get to the like these like 8 talent points required to unlock the next tier of talents, that exists for us. That doesn't really exist for any other class. They already like spend 8 to 10 talent points by the time they actually get to that line. And the problem is that for us, it returns at the 20 point line. When we get to the 20 talent point required unlock line, we basically already have those 20 talents.
Yeah.
We don't really have, we don't really, we're not in the situation where it's like, okay, I have 18 allocated right now. I need to allocate two more. Which of the talents I haven't done yet? or am I going to pick up? We're not
Yeah, it's
really
like
in that
once you're
situation.
at the yeah, once you're at the door, it's already
Yeah,
open.
exactly. That's a good way to put it. Once we get to this like door that other classes kind of need to unlock, it's already open for us, and at that point we don't have any freedom anymore to allocate talent points whatsoever.
Yeah,
And that applies to the
but I mean,
spec trees as well. And I think in the spec trees it's actually a bigger issue, an even bigger issue because the spec tree usually has more valuable talents to specialize or to improve certain parts of your damage rotation or your damage profile. And so you have more talents you want to pick up, and that leaves you with very, very little choice. Like just for assassination, you want to pick IC and Crimson Tempest for AoE, and that typically, and Deathmark, and that typically leaves you with like, I don't know, like 2 to 3 talent points or something that you can allocate somewhere. So it's you're very quickly running into a situation where it's like, okay, how many talent points do you actually have to put not in a pathing to the 3 4 major talents you want, and then for Rogue, that answer is usually you have 1 or 2 talent points. Sometimes you have 0. I think if you want to pick up IC, DTP, and Crimson Tempest, you literally have 0 talent points left because everything is already spent on getting to those 3 talents.
yeah, it's just a hard line to balance between like letting people like path around and pick up what they want, and then also like not allow them to get everything, right? Because like sure you could like again it's like what I was saying earlier with Outlaw, where it's like you could quote unquote make the Outlaw tree better by just putting Fan the Hammer like in an easy accessible spot, but does that actually make the tree better, or is that just like a 6% buff or whatever? Because now you can put in random points to random other DPS talents, right? Does that make the tree better, or is that just like a damage buff that you want? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I also wonder if like putting as many PvP talents into the talent tree was actually a good idea when you have PvP talents already,
I
right?
think it's fine.
So it's like, why
They
not
exist
just
in every
add
tree.
like 2 more PvP talents and move stuff like Shadowrunner and improve wound poison and unbreakable stride and that kind of stuff, and actually replace it with something that is a little bit more useful in all environments and not just one specifically.
I think the thing is about like PvP talents is like you want them to be a sacrifice for PvP players, right?
Yeah, most of them are kind of altering the way that certain abilities work, right? Unless they're adding stuff, but yeah, typically it's something where it's like it changes the way certain skills work, which is actually pretty interesting. I always felt that the PvP talent design is actually really fucking cool. Um, I,
Yeah,
I
I don't know. I totally disagree when people say that there shouldn't be PvP talents in the tree. They exist there because they don't like PvP should have to sacrifice damage talents for stuff like blinding powder or stuff like improve wound poison. Like I think it's totally fine that there's PvP talents in the tree.
Yeah,
Because
it's.
every class has these things.
I
Like
think it's
it's not.
fine if they're to the side and you basically you pick them up if you want to,
Yeah, exactly.
but you're not forced to path through them. But I think that's kind of the issue for us, right? Is we're kind of
Yeah,
forced to
but
path through
yeah.
some of these talents that have literally 0 value in any kind of PvE environment. Um,
Which ones are those?
I mean, specifically Unbreakable Stride. It's just
You don't have to path through that though.
um, you don't have to, but the alternative is that you pick either Rush Setup or Dead Nerves, and that's.
Yeah, dead nerves is insane. The hell? Always take dead nerves.
I mean, I'm not going to argue about the value of taking 3% less physical damage because a lot of bosses actually do deal physical damage, and taking less damage is nice. But you can't like generally tell me that you like the idea of pathing through a talent that just makes you take a little bit less damage. And then it's also
Uh,
just like a very specific type of
I
damage
mean,
that you take with
I
this
take a
stuff.
shitload of those on Red Paladin. I feel pretty satisfied.
But are they as powerful or more powerful, or do they actively interact in some way with the kit that you have as a class, or are they just passive bonuses?
I mean, some of them are just like straight up avoidance, right? Like there's Paladin talents that are just straight up like flat avoidance. I don't think those are like synergistic with Paladin. It's just like, oh, cool, I get free avoidance, which works on things.
I mean, 10% avoidance definitely sounds pretty cracked. Yeah. I It's kind of sad because I did like when Assassination still had the 10% leech on leeching poison. I think that was actually pretty cool. Uh, but I kind of understand why they nerfed it, but then I also kind of don't. Um, Feels like taking away rogue survivability was potentially more of a PvP related change than a PvE one, because I did not feel like Soothing Darkness or Leeching Poison were broken in a PvE environment.
I
Uh,
mean, those got nerfed because they did global changes across the board to classes
Soothing
self-sustain,
Darkness
right?
did, Leeching Poison did not, right? Like it was 10%, and it got nerfed when they changed ER as well. Like that was like in early Vault where they made the
Didn't they
Leeching Poison
didn't they
nerf.
nerf leeching poison the same time they nerfed Meta Leech?
Nah. Like the Leeching Poison was
I'm
nerfed in
pretty
the
sure
same
they
patch
did.
as ER. It was like the first big patch uh after Vault open up. So it definitely wasn't when they did the HP changes or anything like that. Which felt pretty bad because like going from 10 to 5% leech was a pretty big blow um to overall sustainability of the spec.
Um, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure anytime they've nerfed Rogue self-sustain, it's been because they're doing like global changes across the board. I'm
Nah,
like
that
99% sure.
was typically that's the case, definitely, but in this like leech specifically, like leeching poison specifically, it wasn't. But yeah, I don't know. It's I think the class tree in general just has a lot of issues. So hopefully they're aiming at addressing some of these. I know that at least that that there was some promises being made for assassination to finally get rid of the 3 pointers, which is kind of
Yeah,
nice. Hopefully that means that they will still retain the same strength, just at a lower point cost. Because I do think that something like Zoldyck being a 2 pointer and you having 30% execute instead of 45 would actually make the talent less powerful, and cut into the niche of the execute more than it would have to.
yeah.
So hopefully it's going to be like 2 pointer for like 2040 or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, and subtlety, the issue I've always have with subtlety is that I don't really enjoy the spec too much. I know that there's been a lot of concerns about Rotten being viable now. I don't know if that is actually something that people actively dislike, or if that is like what do people dislike about Rotten specifically? But yeah, the main issue for me for Subtlety has always been that I think the last time I played Subtlety and really enjoyed it was in Cataclysm, weirdly enough. And what made Subtlety good back then was the fact that a lot of the damage was inside Shadow Dance. And I feel like the way that the new talent tree was set up, and even the old talent tree to some extent already, was that you basically had talents that allowed you to pick between having stronger Shadow Dance or stronger sustained damage. And weirdly enough, the way it was tuned, it was always leaning towards the non Shadow Dance option, or rather the more sustained damage option, not the big whammy Shadow Dance. And I feel that, yeah, like Kieran was saying earlier, for example, like having a lingering shadow is just such a powerful talent, but it also it's completely changes the way that the spec works, or the idea of the spec works about having big powerful shadow dances. And suddenly you're using a non-stealth ability in dance because it just hits like a truck. And uh yeah, it's an awkward situation of not playing around optimizing the damage within the dance window, but optimizing the damage outside of the dance window. And I think that while that is an interesting niche and design choice, it should not be in the same line as all the talents that improve the shadow dance damage. Right, so if you had
Yeah,
like if Subtlety had like a talent line that would specifically aim at improving backstab, or just generally speaking damage outside of dance, and would sacrifice dance damage for it, I think that would probably be fine. Um, but I always feel that Subtlety is the most enjoyable, and at least it used to be the most powerful, but not anymore, at least for a while now, when you did the most damage during Shadow Dance. And it's moved away more and more from that design choice, uh, which is weird because now you have so many more talents that could open up more ways to improve this damage of the spec individually, either outside of dance or within dance. and then the numerically most powerful is just the one where yeah, you use non-stealth abilities during Shadow Dance just because of how it's tuned and designed.
Yeah, I think there's like I always like when specs try different things, right? Because like obviously like the like Fan the Hammer is very centralizing to how the spec plays. But it's kind of cool. So I feel like sometimes it's worth doing some crazy shit just for to see if it's fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but the question is how do you do that? Like I think if you do that in the new talent tree system, then it needs to not be central or a main pathing point, right? Like then it
Yeah.
needs to be
Oh
a
yeah,
little bit
agreed.
more to the side, and I think that's kind of why I think that when we talked about it earlier, FTH is actually a good talent because it's not something that like the talent that comes after it is not something you need necessarily, because like you said earlier, it's not as potent as the remaining choices that you have. So you can just go without it. It just feel good, and an improvement. It doesn't take away from something, and that's a problem I think with most of the salary design. Kinda is that a lot of choices that you make that alter your rotational gameplay, they don't improve it. They just take it. Or rather, they improve it, but they improve it at the cost of something else. And I think that's not really the greatest design. I think having upsides and downsides to certain talents is good, but if you're basically like changing the core design or the core understanding of something like Shadow Dance in order to push a certain talent, that's just detracting from the overall enjoyment of the spec. It just doesn't feel good to have a talent that gives you damage but takes away damage at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't know if people that are listening in right now, if they would agree, for example, if this is an issue that has been plaguing Salty for a long time. But I always felt like something like having double dance in Shadowlands as an example, or doing more damage in dance, that should have been an actual choice. That shouldn't have been a straight up you will always play at a second dance. But that's what it ended up being, right? And then I look back at BFA, and I think that BFA Salty was just straight up superior in that sense, because you could play like a really really heavy like whammy Shadow Dance build with Dark Shadows and Night Stalker, where you would do massive damage during dance, but you would only have one of them, and then or you could go the route where you had a little bit more flexibility, and it was also a little bit more forgiving to play because you had that extra charge, right? Like something that you said earlier with the Thistle Tea as well. It's just because you have only because you have three charges, it's more forgiving to play, and you don't have to press the button the moment it comes up.
I remember I got called a noob back in Vault for suggesting that maybe one dance subtlety rogue could be viable. I also got called a noob for suggesting that echoing reprimand could be good for assassination. And then, look where we are now.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that you're not a noob though. Let's be real.
No, it just means that I'm Einstein. It's just about a matter of time until people figure it out. I think that's what it means.
Yeah, it's there's two sides to it, right? Where you have on the one hand, it's definitely nice to have a little bit more change and variety
What are you
to each
talking about
individual spec,
suggesting a
but
vault?
you also
I'm
don't want to
talking
change a core aspect of the spec.
I'm talking about during like before the tier came out and people were talking about how the talent tree was dog shit because you always would go two charges of Shadow Dance on Subtlety Rogue. And I said, would it not be possible that you play one dance? And I got called an idiot for saying that you would probably play one dance, maybe. It's been
I think
one
that
dance
wasn't in
entire
Vault, though. I
expect
think that was
before
in beta.
Vault.
Because I do
Okay.
remember the subtlety tiers for the last 2 to 3 months of beta, where everybody was calling the spec absolute garbage and unplayable because it was
Uh-huh.
forced into one dance, and that would make the spec unplayable. That definitely happened. Let's not revise history here, but it happened before
No, it's
Vault. It
because
was
it's
doing
because
it was
I
doing
said
late
it,
beta.
so because I said it, so it's wrong. Careful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. I still don't understand certain talents like sepsis, for example, in subtlety. That still doesn't make sense to me,
I don't
really.
think sepsis makes sense for any of the specs. I think
Uh,
it's like not only is it like a boring spell, but it's also like it's like a boring like do nothing spell, and it's just that's pretty much like the only reason. Just like it's just like a nothing spell.
Yeah, it's weird when it interacts like Hatch is saying right now. It's weird when certain talents are stronger for a certain spec where you would not expect them to be stronger, right? Something like Rupture doing more damage for Subtlety than for Assassination, for example. Like
Yeah,
that's just odd, but that's what ends up happening.
yeah,
I think Sepsis overall, I honestly wouldn't even mind Sepsis as much if it wasn't a 90-second cooldown. I heavily loathe 90-second cooldowns. It's the worst kind of cooldown you can have.
yeah,
Um, Unless it's like a really big one, but I mean, rogues are not allowed to have big cooldowns anymore.
yeah,
So yeah, it's just I think that 90-second cooldowns are. I think they were kind of fine for Sality because Sality at least used to be on like a 30-ish second um, rotational loop between dances, but that's kind of changed a little bit as well, and was usually just because Symbols was 30 seconds, right? And that kind
yeah,
of made everything else 30 seconds as well. But
yeah,
Sepsis just isn't strong enough as a cooldown to warrant being on a 90-second cooldown, I feel. And once it's a 60-second cooldown, I think it would actually align a lot better with other cooldowns, and would feel a little bit better because it would allow you like to play around it a little bit more, um, like Assassination currently does, where it's like, yeah, you actually like chain two stealth garrotes back to back, and then Sepsis gives you like roughly 30-ish seconds of extra garrote, that you normally wouldn't have, right? And that's okay, but yeah, I just don't understand why it's in every single spectre. If you
yeah,
have a talent like this in every single spectre, why isn't it in the class tree?
yeah. Pretty much. Should we move on to the or we end up closing up? It's already been an hour and
Yeah,
a half,
it's
dog.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we kind of already quite a bit. So if there's any questions right now, go ahead, please, and we can actually get through a bunch of those. Use the podcast questions channel for those if you can, please. I think we already had a couple earlier. Yeah, I mean we've kind of gone through the changes like from Ramlu. What kind of changes are expecting for each spec coming into 10.2? I think overall, I think I expect Assassination to receive the biggest overhaul. I think that could actually go into somewhat rework territory, and I think Outer will receive the least amount of attention because it just doesn't really need any. Um, I think left side sub will still see some changing, some pathing improvements, and I think I don't know if this is I saw it somewhere. I think Reels was talking about that the Rogue will no longer have the 8 point requirement where it currently is. It'll be further down.
Correct.
That will actually alter the way that we path through our talent trees quite a lot.
I'm pretty sure you
Um,
mentioned cutting some of the dumb talents that I was talking about, like the
yeah,
2% crit, 4% verse. Like one of those are probably gonna end up leaving.
yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting how that affects our general pathing because it suddenly means that you have to spend a lot more talent points early on talents where right now we kind of get to pick a lot of utility early on because yeah, I mean we have to fill those 8 talent points somehow, and then by the
Yeah,
time we reach the 20 point line we already have those 20 points assigned like we talked about earlier, and moving that 8 point requirement down one line will actually create um, a lot less freedom early on and more freedom in the middle part. And I mean right now there's just not enough talents in the middle part to have that, right? I think if you move the talent like the 8 point line down right now in the class tree, in order to then get to 20, you literally pick every single talent.
yeah,
Right, like it's 5, it's 8. Yeah, there's 14 talent points in the middle tier if you move the 8 point line down one. So you basically pick everything except for two of those talents. So there definitely needs to be a lot of rearrangement happening there. Between the spectres, I think Assassination will probably see the most change. I wouldn't be surprised to see Outlaw see very little change, except for maybe something like the grapple hook that guy was talking about earlier. And then Subtlety will probably just see a little bit of rearrangement on the left side to make it less painful to go all the way down to the Rotten.
yeah.
Possibly just straight up something like making it easier to go from like Secret Stratagem or Inevitability and somehow still make it to the middle part of the tree, essentially. But right now it's just too prohibitive to go there.
Yeah. Did you want to answer some of these assassination
Yeah.
questions,
So
and I
what
can
else do we have? Hatcha
I can
asking, what would you see more possible for Asa? Rampant Ferocity, Eminem cleaves enemies with Rapture Road, or an AoE short Rapture kind of talent and deleting IC.
I'm just gonna
Um,
run to the bathroom really quick while you can
yeah,
talk about
sure.
assassination
Since
for a
you
little
don't
bit.
have any clue about anything that's not outlaw anyway. Um,
Yep.
so this is on a personal note. I would gladly see IC removed again. I think IC is a really bad talent for assassination. It's obviously very powerful. It's really nice to have an AoE silence and all of those kind of things, but it basically takes away the entire ramp for assassination, and that was always removing ramp from a dot class is really bad because you're suddenly where previously you used to take like 15 or 20 seconds to ramp up and then you would immediately go into a maintenance phase. You're now ramping up with one global cooldown or two global cooldowns. You're immediately you don't have a maintenance phase for 15 seconds, and you're now in a situation where you have unlimited resources and you don't have anything to spend them on in a meaningful capacity. And that is just not a situation that you want to be in design wise. So if IC is to stay, you would have to do something like Rampant Ferocity, where you just spread your minimum damage on all the targets that have your dots running, and I think that's counterproductive to the idea of having damage over time in the first place. So yeah, I would rather see something like Smartcasted, what's it called, the Rapture spread, replicating shadows, where you have like Smartcasted Raptures and Garrotes, for example, and then allow those abilities to actually deal damage. I've always compared this to assassination in PvP. If you look at the damage distribution between abilities in PvP, Rapture and Garrote do the majority of your damage. I want that back for assassination in PvE. I want Rapture and Garrote to actually deal a shit ton of damage. I don't care if my melees don't do damage. I don't care if my Eminem doesn't do damage. I just want Rapture, Garrote, and the poisons to actually hurt. And then that automatically allows you to scale into AoE a lot better. And you basically no longer have a need for IC because just manually applying your triple Garrote from your stealth and then slowly rapturing up targets already allows you to ramp up your damage in a very meaningful and significant way. You won't have upfront damage, but that's fine if the sustained damage is high enough to make up for it. But yeah, to continue from Kieran, to continue Hutch's question, what could be done to improve assassination's accessibility? What do you mean by that specifically? Because to me, assassination is pretty accessible. I guess like when I think of accessibility, I always think about how difficult it is to play, and how easy it is to get into the spec. And I think assassination is actually the easiest it has ever been on AoE by far, thanks to IC. Because I always considered assassination to be one of the most difficult and complex classes to play well on AoE, because it didn't have this easy, just similar to like sadism from Shadow Priest that just allowed you to apply both dots at the same time, for example. You never had that as assassination, and that added a lot of target selection, skill expression, and just making sure that you were always aware of the maintenance of your dots and everything, and the remaining duration. And I would like the spec to retain that, and right now that's just not really present. You basically like the way that M plus just happens to work out at the moment with the duration of each pull is just you open with IC on every single pack, and then you just refresh your bleeds on the highest health targets once that first set of bleeds runs out, and you spam CT or Envenom, and it doesn't actually make a difference which one of those you spam, because both of those are just equally as good to spam, and that's not good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the there's too much talent point bloat in assassination right now. The fact that you don't get to pick up Serrated Bone Spike is really bad. Although I do think that SBS in itself is already kind of not great because it's adds too many global cooldowns for not enough gain, so you'd have to actually buff SBS quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's personally what I was hoping for. Like to me, the change that I would like to see is Scent of Blood needs to work a little bit better on single target. I don't know how you could do that other than making bleed stack somehow. That could be a talent. But honestly, I just want Serrated Bone Spike to be a key component of the assassination tree. And put it where Scent of Blood is, and then have a choice node after Serrated Bone Spike that buffs it in, or that changes or alters the way the talent works in two ways. And then just pick one of those. Um,
I mean, a way you could make it work is like you could make it so like Scent of Blood gives you flat agi, and then like you could make the flat value for having it on one target larger, and then like reduced additional agi per additional target, so that way it's like still good to have it in multiple targets, but then it's also still like desirable in single target, right? Something
yeah,
like
it's
that.
basically where it's like, I mean, you could basically make it. The thing is that Scent of Blood originally was definitely designed to allow you to really scale into AoE by giving you a shit ton of
Mhm.
agility. The fact that it's capped right now is already a problem for that. You could
Yeah,
straight up just uncap it, and I think the talent would be good and very powerful, but Assassination still wouldn't be broken.
yeah.
Um, the problem is that, yeah, it doesn't really do anything for single target. I don't think you can fix this issue for Assassination that you have to choose between single target or AoE, but you would have to do it to not be as prohibitive as it currently is. But yeah, I just like Serrated Bone Spike to come back and introduce some of the like SBS had really good Torghast powers, really interesting ones that changed it in major ways, and I think you could bring some of those back and just have those as a choice node um,
Yeah.
behind SBS and just make it a core component of Assassination Cleave and AoE. So you have a third dot for cleave situations instead of relying on the same two dots like everybody else.
Yeah.
And then you could just straight up remove IC because I mean the only thing you would be losing is the AoE silence, which is nice and honestly pretty broken. Because I do think that if you make Assassination AoE viable enough to be competitive with Salty and Outlaw, there's no reason to play any of those two other specs because the AoE silence is just too good.
Yeah, it reminds me of back in I remember back in BFA, okay? This is a long time ago, ancient history. I remember when in BFA out like assassination was the best spec because of shrouded suffocation, right? And I remember people saying in the Outlaw channel, they were like, Outlaw Rogue, it'll never be viable in keys because Assassination Silence is too good. Iron Wire is too powerful. I think the thing is like the best spec is just going to be the one that does the most damage. It always will be. All the specs have their own little like flavor of utility that, makes them slightly better sometimes, but a lot of
Yeah,
it just comes
that's
down to
true to a
output,
certain
right?
extent. The thing with something like Silence and Solar Beam, for example, is that an AoE Silence is a damage gain for the other people in your group because stacking up mobs faster is a DPS gain. Not for the rogue who's doing it, but it is a DPS gain for the other DPS that you have in your group. And that is often underrated. That's why not all utility is the same. But yeah, let's move on from some of the assassination stuff maybe. Although most questions obviously are about assassination.
And
Uh,
a few rapid fire outlaw questions and then wrap this up.
yep. So Hutch, again for outlaw, sometimes having to hold dance K off for time. Do you think a low cooldown and keep it rolling, but two charges with less effect would be a thing? Honestly, I think I don't know how you feel about it, guy, but I would like to move away from a World of Warcraft where we press all cooldowns on cooldown.
I mean, that hasn't. I mean, I mostly agree, but I mean, like that's not even how Outlaw plays right now. Like even the HO build is not very much
I
cooldowns
mean
on cooldown. Like you're using.
that's because you have so many cooldowns that you can't press them when they come up because you have four up at the same time.
Well, no, it's more just like the value of cooldowns for the hidden opportunity build isn't that they're a cooldown. Like you don't use Shadow
Yeah,
Dance
but
on
he was
cooldown.
asking
You
about
use it to.
keep it rolling specifically, right?
I mean, it's like mostly like I think the thing like so here's my opinion. I think there's like this huge thing in the Outlaw channel where there's just like this perception of how the Keep It Rolling build plays, and like the perception has become like a caricature, and then like it's been extracted out like a million times where it's like I feel like people's interpretation of the Keep It Rolling build just isn't accurate to how it actually plays. Like it's not very often that you're going to be sitting on Keep It Rolling. Do you know what I mean? Like you're just gonna press it a lot because like that's just like the way the spec plays. Like you're gonna press Shadow Dance, you're gonna get count the odds procs. Like that's just like
Yeah.
like sure, like it's the same as like oh like is the hidden opportunity build terrible because what happens if you don't get any audacity procs or opportunity procs? It's like yeah okay if you hit the reverse jackpot and you low roll on everything, then yeah, it's dog shit. But I mean, like these kinds of situations just happen so infrequently. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Nah, for me,
And that's like
I
a
just
larger
I
issue
just
I
heavily
have, but
dislike the overall cooldown design where everything is just always used on cooldown. I always like being able to either sync cooldowns that have different cooldowns to get the most benefit out of it, and then you have a little bit of choice depending on what situation you're in. Is the air dying or needs to die ASAP, then you send it right now. If not, then you can wait for a little bit of syncing. I think that's fine. Um,
I think that's
but
something I've liked about Shadow Dance being in the class tree specifically is that for Outlaw, it's a very useful ability in multiple different ways. So
yeah,
like for the hidden opportunity build, Shadow Dance is exclusively used to like refill your procs, right? Like you run out of procs
bro,
and then
bro.
you use it to refill, right? Um Meanwhile, for the keep it rolling build, you are just using it on cooldown because you want to get your buffs, cycling faster, right? Because like the more buffs you get, the more CDR you get, the more CDR you get, the more keep it rolling you get, the more keep it rolling you get,
Uh,
the more like
uh,
kind of feedback you get.
you know what this reminds me of right now?
What's up, man?
Uh, one of the many who ask memes.
Um,
I'm sorry if it's a
I
bit rude,
guess,
but
I
yeah,
guess.
yeah, nah, it's I do agree that that it's nice to have some of the more spec specific talents now be available to all the specs. But I also think that there's definitely this danger of just washing down the identities of other specs, right? And it's definitely sad that the we're basically living now in a world where something like Seal Fate, something like Shadow Dance is accessible to everybody, which theoretically is pretty cool. But then the specs that used to want those skills the most sometimes don't even play them anymore. I think that's probably it loses the identity of each individual spec. Um, but
Like
yeah,
I guess, but I mean, like sub is still like the spec focus on Shadow Dance. Like I just like that Shadow Dance is like this multi-purpose tool for Outlaw. Like with different builds, it's a different build. Like it's a different button at like a foundational level and how it affects the rotation, right? Like only this spell being in the class tree allows this to exist, right?
yeah, that's I think that's true.
And the entire structure of the Outlaw tree is designed around Shadow Dance being a part of the spec somewhat.
Yeah,
And I think that's made it a more interesting spec.
yeah, I would agree with that. So then we have one more. I can't actually read the names right now because of streamer mode on Discord. Should Death from Above stay a PvP talent, or at the very least a choice node in the subtree? With
I think
parentheses,
Sec
I
Tech
miss
is
Legion. The thing is that if they brought Death from Above back right now, it wouldn't feel nearly as impactful as it did in Legion because it's missing some of the core components of what made it feel good in Legion, which is Master Assassin, and which is just the overall damage, like amount of damage amps you had for it back then, combined with trinkets and combined with the legendary cloak. It because at the end of the day, like the M plus AOE burst feel that Death from Above gave you wasn't just Death from Above, right? It was there were like 5, 6 different things that all played into each other, and just that one ability wouldn't make it feel better. There were just a lot of things that tied into it that made it like this bursty, and DFA was actually one of the least impactful ones. It was the combination with Moonglaze, with symbols, damage amps, and everything. The tier set, the legendary cloak that made your first Shuriken Storm hit like a truck. So I do think that honestly, I think that subtlety, the way that it works right now, that's my personal opinion, right? I think that subtlety, the way it works right now, Sectech kind of fills that niche of DFA, and it's just better, except for it's still not working with acrobatic strikes and other stuff. But overall, I think I definitely would say that Sectech is just a straight up better button than DFA is.
yeah, I mean ever since Sec Tech was like initially shown during like BFA, that's always where my head was at. It's like, isn't this just like designed to be what DFA was, except not stupid? I don't know. I feel like they do the same thing, right? Except there's just
Yep.
no like wacky animation that sometimes clips you through the floor. Like it's like functionally the same button. It's like your biggest nuke AOE finisher, right? Or just like
Yep.
generic finisher. Excuse me.
Well, let's do two more. Does Outlaw AoE damage profile need attention? I wouldn't think so. No, I think it just needs a slight bump in single target, which it will be getting, and then its AoE will be perfectly fine. And it will be fine on a level where it's going to be incredibly strong on like 3, 4 target cleave, which does matter quite a bit in Mythic Plus. It won't do the whole like the massive overall that Salty does on like a few dungeons where you can actually pull like beyond 10 targets. But I think that the Outlaws capped Omega roll has never really been an issue. And it's not one now either. I think Outlaw does very solid damage, not as good as some of the broken specs, obviously, not as bursty because it's not a cooldown based class, but I think the overall damage profile of Outlaw is actually pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I mean, it's like what I was saying earlier, where like whatever spec is best, people will post hoc rationalize like why the spec is good for reasons other than damage, right? Like anytime in BFA when Outlaw was good, the quote unquote reason Outlaw was the best was because of gouge, because of between the eyes stun, between like vanish, cheap shot is so valuable, blah blah blah. But realistically, the reason was it did the most damage, right? What spec did you play in Shadowlands Season 1? You played Outlaw. Why? Because it did the most damage. Why did you play Subtlety in Season 2? Why? Because it did the most damage. It wasn't because of like Shadow Dance cheap shot. It wasn't because of like Shuriken Storm slows. It's not because of blah blah blah. It's because it does the most damage. When Outlaw does the most damage, its straight line damage profile is considered a benefit because having damage for when like the whatever broken cooldown spec pops all of its cooldowns, you need damage for the other packs, and whoa, Outlaw does that. It's so valuable. So I think its damage profile is fine.
It
It's
depends
like
a little bit as well about what level of play we're talking about, right? I think the consideration something like Gouge or just overall like Garrote Silence and all those kind of stuff, um, it's really only comes into play at a level where most people just don't play at. And so there's a lot of fake value in certain utility that people are putting a lot of emphasis on, and I very much would include amplify. I would very much like to include a trophic poison there. That's like sure, there's a lot of value in these for certain people, but the question that people tend to not ask is whether they are part of that group. And I would say 9 out of 10 times, or maybe 99 out of 100 times, the answer to that question is no, they are not part of that group that actually have to worry about that kind of stuff.
yeah,
But yeah,
especially damage
last
is
one for
pretty
you
good
then.
utility.
With the recent changes of Outlaw coming up next reset, do you think that keeping HO viable on single target by reducing the energy cost of ghostly strikes or increasing the damage buff would be good? Do you even play ghostly after the change? Don't you
No,
play
I think
sepsis?
I'm pretty sure it's like 0.5% difference between Ghostly Strikes and Sepsis. I mean, like they just want to make HO better on single. Like, I mean, you can just buff any random talent in there. Like, you can make Taken by Surprise better. You can make
I mean, you could
Ghostly
just buff
Sepsis,
ambush,
Blade
right?
Rush better. You could, but it would
Or would
also buff
that?
Keep It
I guess it
Rolling.
would affect
It would buff everything, right?
subtlety too much.
It would also do that. I mean, you just buff one of the random left side of the tree talents. I don't think you need to do
Yeah.
anything fancy or specific. You can just make Sepsis do more
Although
damage.
6%
You
is quite a
can
big number. Like you can't really put that in just a single talent, right?
um, you could.
I mean, sure, fair, fair enough. I mean, you could literally just slap like a 5% ambush damage amp on hidden opportunity or something, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. You can make Sepsis do more cast damage. You can make Ghostly Strike. I mean, Ghostly Strikes was that before, right? It was like a crazy
Yeah.
damage increase talent, right? It's like you can just make those talents. It's not like it's not gonna like blow up the game or anything.
Alrighty. So, we're gonna end the cast then for today. Thanks everybody for joining once again. Big shout out as well to obviously Whisper who couldn't make it here today, as well as Ronkus, Oxy, and Datsun for always providing a bunch of the background work. And yeah, I mean, the plan is to kind of, like, I mean, we say this every time to do these a little bit more regularly, but that's definitely not going to happen because Whisper is going to be in Germany for a while. And obviously, he's not going to be able to join the podcast, but maybe we just do another one of these sessions with a guest or two in a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
So just keep your eyes peeled, get the podcast roll in the bot rolls channel to be informed, and then as always, these will be uploaded to YouTube and Spotify, and I think Apple Podcasts as well. And we'll ping everybody, or not everybody, but at podcasts once those are uploaded. So yeah,
yeah.
thanks for tuning in, and see you guys around, and see you next time. Bye bye.
See you guys later.